already in there. Let's see, the ad hoc meeting, there were just a few of us. It's Matt, me, Tristan. So that way, I don't know, I feel like some people that came to the first meeting are kind of done with all this, and I'd hate to keep pestering them if they aren't signing up.
I'm gonna go ahead and sign up right now.
Thank you. Cool.
Matt, where exactly is the sign-up sheet?
If you look in the agenda, right under subcommittee resources, I'll highlight it right here. I made sure to write it in really small font so no one could find it, which may not be the best way to get folks in there. But do you see it now, Margot? I've highlighted it.
No, where should I look?
In the agenda, do you have a copy of that?
I don't think I got it. I don't know.
Okay, Stephanie's dropped it in the chat.
Okay, I'll look. Thank you. Okay, I'll find it. Thank you.
No problem, no problem. So, you know, we weren't able to get a quorum of this subcommittee to meet as a group and write up comments, but I know Ned emailed me some comments, and I had a chance to meet with Tristan and some tree planting folks that tend to do that. And so we looked at the work plan, and it's, well, we're giving people a few more minutes before I talk about the good, the bad, and the, oh my God, what are we gonna do with all of this? Because it really is it's a work plan that assumes some things that frankly aren't in place. Oh, Mary Elizabeth's got them. We got the red ink. That's how I learned. Yeah,
Okay,
cool.
God, I signed in. Good.
So for collating steering committee comments into sort of a final work plan version, who is that my responsibility? Do we have Air District support on capturing these comments and getting them back?
All right. So it depends on the form. So it sounds like, it looks like maybe Mary Elizabeth has written comments. So I think maybe she'll verbalize them during the meeting. So we can certainly take those notes. And then Matt, it sounds like you met with some folks. Do you have those comments you want to send our way?
No, well, I can certainly share that document, and Ned wrote up some comments in email, but I'm sure he's prepared to verbalize those as well. So maybe we just treat today like it's zero, and everybody gets our comments in. I had trouble providing specific narrow comments on the work plan as is, because I actually think there's more global changes that this work plan needs to take a look at.
Can maybe we start, and maybe I'll just suggest, if you have like, maybe start big and then we can get to specifics. So maybe if you want to start there, Matt.
Yeah, well, I'll lead off, but I'm sure other people have comments on this. I mean, it's a sharp work plan if you wanted to plant trees in a place where jurisdiction was clear. But the work plan assumes that Caltrans or the city or the county support any of this. And so as someone who's been trying to plant in Caltrans right away with a city funded project for several months, the agencies are not coordinating. And so I actually think we have a planning and a partnership challenge before we actually even get down to the nitty gritty of the work plan. And then once we get into that work plan, there's some, then I think it's easier to set up some of the priorities that Ned calls out around, demonstratable public health benefits for planting in certain spaces. There may also be some health benefits analysis that we need to talk about that I don't see bulleted out in the current work plan. So I'll just say, like, to make this messier and which is not my goal, I actually think we don't have a community with an urban greening plan that we can build on. So if you have $1 million for vegetative barrier strategies, there's no one who can meet the criteria of this RFP right now to develop vegetative barriers. The city isn't capable of doing it. The county isn't capable of doing it. And none of them are at a place yet where they would let me do it. So I think there might be I'd hate to say this, an urban greening master planning ritual that we need to talk about that may be a better use of these funds than some sort of a cost per tree analysis. And I'll just put that out there. I see some hands and see if anybody else wants to tell me how wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I do hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, Matt, I have a question. What about the water district? They have different kind of water district, like District 1, District 2, and they are responsible for the water and irrigation. I'm more concerned, like you just said about the tree and who's gonna take care of it, who's gonna water them, or who's gonna, trim it and keep it up to, instead of leaving it dried and.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Ned. I mean, if the city funds me to plant a tree, they're not going to fund me to maintain Caltrans right away when Caltrans hasn't maintained its own right away for several decades, right? So there's a real impasse here around that with vegetative barrier. I think for urban greening, maybe there's an easier solution, but I actually think they could both be solved together if we use this as a planning opportunity.
Right. So did the air quality management know about those type of, because I know they get elected every 4 years, the water district. So how do we get them in contact, and if they could, like you said, send irrigation to the trees that's needed for well underdeveloped communities?
And maybe I can kind of take your question, Douglas, and take one step back to address maybe Matt's broader concern. And it's certainly a concern we definitely want to hear more about. So I agree, if there's folks that can share more about what Matt's, or, if they have support for what Matt says, or have like, we've all forgot about this one brilliant organization, we definitely want to keep talking about it. I'll say, from our perspective, I agree, and maybe this is what Aaron's about to say. The project plan assumes that there is an entity out there that we can pay, essentially contract with, to run the program, right? We're not tree program people. To Matt's point, maybe there's not a particular group out there, and we know groups personally that we've worked with that aren't based in San Joaquin County that we know our resources, and kind of the way that we wrote this project plan started with that understanding that there are groups out there. Some of them do exactly what Ned it sounds like he's talking about. They do exactly that, where they partner and group this with health studies and metrics and data and monitoring and all of that. But to Matt's original point, none of that matters if we don't have the partnership or the understanding of the partnership to do the main piece, which is planting the trees. Matt, do you feel like, just in general, your comment, I think you kind of hit on it a little bit at the end of your comments there, is both, like, we think this could be an issue for the urban greening side and vegetative barriers? And the reason I ask that is because vegetative barriers is a little different in that it's more like big projects and maybe identifiable. We can almost identify ways around that, where we maybe partner with, say, for example, we know the port is one particular group where we want vegetative barriers probably around a lot of the port emissions or trucks off of the port. We know that they're a partner we already have identified as being at the table. And this port is an example. I know that there are other partners that people maybe are wanting to partner with outside of this, but they're just an example of an entity that isn't the city, isn't the county, isn't Caltrans, isn't a big bureaucracy, maybe, that I think is kind of being implied, that we could work with. Another example being, if there's a particular stationary source out there that folks feel like, hey, we really need to protect our community that lives around the stationary source. These are project-based things in vegetative barriers where we can maybe still take the concept in the project plan and then work through those issues. All of that said, I think your point on the urban greening side definitely makes sense. Like, we want to find a partner who can run that program, is the way that the project is written. And I think Matt's point is that we don't know who that partner could be. And in your working, Matt, in Stockton, we don't necessarily maybe have that expert. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I mean, so I have the largest community tree planting project in this city, and I'm in a contract. I'm also not saying, hey, give Matt all the money and he'll sort all this out, because I don't particularly want to be alone in coaching the city and the county and the state and working together on this. But I do hear you, like, we do have a third option for a demonstration project. Like, I think we need to set expectations. A vegetative barrier solution for Stockton counts in the tens of millions. And so what we have an opportunity to do here with this measure is to develop a demonstration project. And I would fully agree that the port could be the most succinct way to get to that. I also think, to Ned's very valid point, that we need to demonstrate where these things are most meaningful. And if we do this in a way that brings people together, finding future money isn't a problem. It's not the money. It's what's the partnership and what's the political will and who's willing to support each other. So, you know, no, Jessica, you have described my concerns and hopes very accurately, frighteningly accurately. I've been talking a lot though. Go ahead, Aaron. I see you.
Well, kind of my thought was, and I may be off base here, is that the plan is just kind of this simple framework, right? We just want to want ARB to approve a framework of doing trees or doing vegetative barriers in the community. I see all of Ned's comments here, and the reports, the data, that will be done with the project partner, will report to us either on a quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, or what have you, as they started doing the project. As you get somebody who knows what they're doing, right? The other thing too is that partner will make those connections, which Matt, I agree, who's going to do it, right? Make the connections where I think we've heard previously in previous meetings that not everybody wants a tree on their property, right? So like, we also have to do two different things. One is vegetative barriers. We got to make sure we're very clear on the two that we're doing here. One is urban green, one is barriers, and they're very distinctly different. They're very, very different. So in the plan itself, I don't want to get hung up in too much of the details of it, because that's more in the RFP. And then you have with your project partner, they give you their implementation plan, how they're going to do it when they basically write the proposal in the RFP, right? So they give you, here's what you want in the RFP, and they give you their proposal, how they would do it, essentially, right? What I would be worried about is putting way too much detail in the plan itself, and then you're stuck and you have to go back and redo it. And so why this plan is very kind of simplistically written is like, hey, we're going to do vegetative barriers and urban greening in the community. Here's the general framework of it. And the nitty-gritty details will be done with the implementation plan and with through the RFP with the project partner or partners that are chosen for this. But I do want to be very clear that the barriers in urban greening are very, very different. And so I want to make sure we're talking about it here. I know we're talking about trees, but I want to make sure we're very clear which one we're talking about, trees or vegetative barriers. And that's what I want to make sure we're clear on. But it was kind of written kind of not vague, but it's more open. So when we get to the RFP itself and choosing the partners, we're not limited by something we wrote 9 months ago when things have changed, right? When you're choosing a partner goes, we can do this, but here's this limitation here. Like, oh man, okay. So keep that in mind as we're working through this thing. We don't mind changing it. We want, going back and make sure the community is happy and get it done correctly. But also I've seen where I don't want to box myself into a couple things here. Anyway, I'll stop there and sit back and listen. But those are kind of my thoughts at this point in time as we're implementing some of these things in different communities at this point in time.
Thanks, Aaron. Real quick before Mary Elizabeth. So if in a work plan like this, there could be multiple RFPs for the more granular projects. So
yes,
you don't necessarily need a single prime.
No, you could say $1 million. You could set out, do one RFP for 200 grand and stop.
Perfect.
And say in the community, say, we want to do 200 grand and we want all trees around XYZ school and whatever. I don't know what it is, right? give us an RP for that. So you do that when you bring your project partner in, you do that when we want all these reporting, we want, here's your plan. So you kind of learn from that. And the next one, let's say you do another 200 grand, another 200 grand, another 150 grand, whatever you're going to do. But keep in mind, there is a timetable too. We can't stretch it out for 5 years. There's some timetable to spend this money as well. So anyway, I just want to kind of get that going there and talk about that as well. And then I see a question here. Routine maintenance actually is included in these plans.
Why don't you go ahead, Mary, and add some context to your comments in the chat, please.
All right, yes, thank you. Yes, it is included here, but it wasn't in the Imperial County plan.
Right.
And so my one concern with that has to do with the possibility, if we break up this project too much, we may find that going down the line, oh, here's something that we need to have done, but we don't have anybody lined up because we weren't concerned with it then. And so I really think that it's essential that we have like a whole project that can move forward and we can have that continuity. And so this initial study here that is allowed in this project here, what I did was I compared this work plan to the South Central Fresno and the Imperial County plan because they were very similar. And so I agree, with Matt that, maybe we need to have some kind of scoping work plan to establish these relationships that are so essential for moving forward and implementing this project, whether it be urban greening or vegetative barriers. So I'll leave that at that for now.
Can I say one thing to that before we move on? Is that I agree that there is some risk by breaking it up to these smaller type projects, so yeah, I guess that's life, right? Nothing's ever, once you learn, you're like, oh shoot, we should have done this. So it's like, maybe there's two $500,000 grant, I don't know, but maybe is larger and you kind of learn from the first one, you do the second one and maybe some mistakes you made and what have you, or maybe you do them simultaneously and get two different project proposals from different entities, who knows? Anyway, just some thoughts.
Oh, Margot, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I just need some clarification. So I only have, I didn't get to the your little subcommittee, subcommittee. And I should have been there because maybe I'd understand a bit more. But so from what Aaron is saying, so should the trees and the urban greening and the vegetative barriers, are you saying they really should be separate as a written up separate thing? And I'm also wondering if, so what's our pathway here? There's a timeline, there's things that need to get done, there's a pathway, there's things you need to start with. What's our starting point? Is it making these relationships? Is it having an idea of what we're doing? Who does, and where does the decision get made as to where these projects will exist? How does all that happen? What am I missing here?
Well, I think maybe I'll try my best here too, and maybe Jessica or Harold can split.
We do have like a brief timeline we could pull up on the screen right now. It doesn't answer all your questions, but maybe David, can you pull that up while Aaron kind of talks through in general?
Let me talk in general about, so the plan itself is vegetative barriers, urban greening, where it's just one. It gives us the authority to basically kind of do it, right? That's what we want from ARB, just the ability just to do these things with this money is all we're really asking for at this point in time. The nitty-gritty is actually in the RFP. Now, the RFP can lay out exactly what everybody wants, where we want the trees to be planted at, with the reports we want, what type of trees to go in, because there are some specifications from ARB, what type of trees have to go there, right? Like their plan, how to maintain them, stuff like that. We'll go in there. We can go into the details with a committee here, but that's kind of the first step. Now, what's not on this timeline here, there could be actually where you have an idea for RFP, and you can have like a pre-meeting with potential applicants and let them ask a bunch of questions. because it might help you shape your RFP, right? Like, ooh, I didn't think about that. Or they might bring up some cool things that you're like, oh, I never thought about that during trees, or might help you shape your RFP. But so here is kind of the draft, kind of how the timeline would kind of work. We get the project plan approved, which is very basic. We would basically go in and write an RFP. Let's just talk about urban greening for right now. Write an RFP for urban greening based upon the committee's requirements, what they want it done, where they're going to be located at, you know, how much money is for admin, things like that, you know, because there's some overhead that's involved in this and the maintenance and things like that. We go off RFP, and essentially, you know, the subcommittee works on the RFP. We work on it, we get it all set to go, we send it out. Whether it's 500 grand, $1 million, whoever decided. It's out for 45, 90 days. The committee gets to decide. You know, 90 days seems like a long period of time, but these could be big plans. So it could be enough time they have to talk to project partners and do this. There's a lot that goes on with that, you know, 3 months to do that. They come in, the committee, along with the district, we go through it and select, you know, the best projects we think will work based upon the criteria set in the RFP, the ranking criteria in the RFP. There is actually kind of ranking and point system in the RFP. You rank them and you decide who's the best, and then you write a contract. We write a contract with the grantee, we'll say, or the sub-grantee, we're gonna call it here, the tree planting people, and they let them go and give them, you know, 2 years, a year and a half, whatever, to do the project, and they're reporting on a quarterly basis back to the committee what to do and what's been approved and what's happened for the money, and then we pay them out as they do the work. Right, every quarter they submit us invoices, they submit completed work, and you kind of have it laid out in your contract how the payments go. And then after 2 years, let's say, they're completed and you finish that project. At the same time, you could be doing doing vegetative barriers and on a parallel scope with the same process, essentially, if that makes any sense. So that's the bigger scale of it, of how it works. There's a little more detail we get into with the committees on the nuances of the RFP and the ranking criteria in the RFP, but that's a high level how it would work. We did find out though that it's probably a 2-year project to do this. Could be more, could be less. We'll have to let the committees know, or the potential contractors know, or let them tell us how long they think they need to do these type of projects. You know, because there is time. There's trying to get the right of ways and authority and irrigation and stuff like that, so they can do it. So there's just some things that we don't think about that could go into something like this. So I'll stop there. And I'll answer any questions, and then maybe David or Jessica can help me fill in some of the answers there.
Doug, go ahead. Let's hear your question.
Aaron, you know what? I'm a little bit scared when you say something like, it's giving me a red flag when you say, oh, don't worry about this, don't worry about this, don't worry about that. There's a little thing that they're not going to bring up, but that's something that we as a consumer or a person that think the way that what does change, and what happened that something does bring up the question, it's already been answered. So for me to kind of gag somebody and say, and from the question of concern, I think that's something that is irrelevant for everyone, and something that it should be spoken out in that way. So I definitely understand where you're coming from regarding the how you guys can function as a organization to subcontract other vendor regarding tree or other stuff that might line, or the design, the layout, and all that stuff. It has to be discussed about. I don't know if it's to the city, to the planning commission. I don't know if it's going to be in the county. So that's a very good. That's a thing that I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, I think that's Doug. I just want to uplift your comments. The devil is absolutely in the details, but I think if there's a way for us to build in community checkpoints and oversights into some of the language in this work plan, like whoever gets this RFP meets with us. And I mean, they can't even do this without us, quite frankly.
Right.
So it's going to be, you know, whether we like it or not, we're going to be involved with whoever ends up doing this for the long haul. So
perfect. Good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for reassuring. Thank you.
And that will be the details will be in the RFP and in the contract we have with the the party who's doing the work. That will be the details. We could really go into the nitty gritty of it, the reports, the data that's gone back and forth, and that data will be shared that way. Is how I kind of foresee it.
And if I can share, and just to add, I mean, just to add exactly to what Matt and Aaron said, to Doug's comments, is I think when Aaron is saying, don't worry about, it's this project plan piece. And I know CARB can support us on this as well, is very different than the RFP. It is very high level. It is just to make sure CARB has the authority from their incentives team and their legal requirements to allow us to spend cap dollars. So these specially identified funding pots of money on this particular project. So they're looking for things like, you know, how was this SERP measure created? What are the benefits to this SERP measure? How are you going to quantify and tell us the benefits, and how much are you planning to spend generally, which we already have identified in our SERP and you see already in the project plan. All of the RFP stuff, I think, where we're going to get into a lot of the comments that have been touched on, none of what we put in the, from what I'm hearing, at least from the comments, none of what is in the project plan right now precludes us or prevents us from putting all of the details you're all talking about: maintenance, community engagement, partners, health assessment. All of that can still go in the RFP based on the broad, open way that the project plan is formed right now. Not to say that we won't take all of these comments and amend the project plan as needed, but I just want to assure, and maybe CARB can kind of support that these project plans have been really short and very general compared to the RFPs that tend to follow them.
Yeah, and Jessica, I can just, as the CARB person actually primarily assigned to this subcommittee, absolutely can back up what you're saying, which is these project plans really are just more to get CARB to the point where our incentives folks understand how the money is going to be spent, what the expected benefits are, that it is actually identified as a community priority. And with the AB 617 funds, there is actually a lot more flexibility than really historically any of the other incentives that CARB has issued. And so, yeah, at this point, it's just really, there's a very big difference between the project plan that CARB will be looking at to approve the project and what will come later, which is actually the details of the request for proposals that you'd be looking for to get a vendor to help out. So.
Yeah, so I that's comforting that we get to flesh out some of these concerns in the RFP process. So now that we've sort of shared those concerns, maybe we should actually look at the work plan proper. Well, does anybody have any more sort of high level comments about how to approve this work plan? I mean, I'll tell you, like, when the work plan says that someone has to, maintain a tree for 10 years in the setback, I don't know anybody that can guarantee that. And what I would ask is, why do we have to put that in there? I know CAL FIRE will make me do that with their grant. But this should be a little more, I would hope that we could be more flexible in this framework. So, I mean, I don't know if we're ready to get down to like that level of detail around program eligibility.
Yeah, I would agree that maybe we should go ahead and pull up the work plan and go through it a little bit and look at some of those details like you just talked about with the 10-year thing. Because I agree, it is pretty general and not limiting at all. But there are several small things potential obstacles, like you mentioned with the 10-year thing, that maybe we could suggest to make it a little more general.
Procurement stuff in it. Yeah, so well, yes. And then, so can I share my version? Is this the best place to start? Okay, great. So I've got something in the chat here, but why don't I just share my screen and we can roll through this together. All of which is to say, Aaron, I totally hear you. We got to get this approved, and we don't have a lot of clock. And if we want to get down to the details in the RFP, I agree. We do need to get to something to carb soon. So let me share my screen and we can see some of the comments that we have in here, and then anybody else can help us add. I'm happy to type them in here, but the link is in the chat. And now we can all look at the same thing. And so just starting at the top, you know, my first comment that I had in here was, you know, that this isn't a discrete project, but I'm happy to resolve that after what we just talked about. But it was just a comment about a need for someone to convene these governments if this is ever going to work. But everybody's had a chance to read the narrative of the high level stuff, I hope.
Yeah, most of the first part of this document is really outlining what we have already done as far as who we are as a steering committee, and what we're doing so far. The only details are later in the later section.
Thanks, Cliff. So, let me zoom in a little bit so it's easier for everyone else to see. I'm just going to scroll down here to where we finally start to get into some details. Names of community groups. I think our steering committee should be sufficient. I mean, I think we could also add that we do have a long-running cohort of people working on the TCC project. Aaron, like CARB doesn't care about that, do they?
No, this is just more straight about the SERP stuff right here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this
Yep.
is what we all lived through. So I'll remove this that I started to put in there. But
I'm sorry, you just went past that second sentence about the vegetarian barriers can reduce the emissions. They can't reduce emissions. Right here, this emissions. The
okay,
next, you should put concentrations. They can reduce exposure concentrations.
okay, great. So you're looking at which
Right.
line?
The third line from the top. All the
Vegetative.
main benefit, vegetative barriers, and
Oh,
then it
sorry.
says cap. No, right down here in the third paragraph, where it says CAP,
Uh-huh.
CAP, these
Okay, right.
emissions.
Yeah.
Yeah, these emissions, the emissions are coming from the sources. We're not going to we're not going to reduce the emissions. We can reduce the exposure concentrations.
You could
Okay.
perhaps just write exposure after emissions in the fourth line there, and that would just clarify that.
Does
it's
this
emission
work
exposure.
for you, Mary?
There
That
you
we're
go.
reducing
Yeah.
exposure? Great. Yeah, and well, I'll also say that we kind of challenge that I'm not planting trees to stop global climate change. I'm doing it to protect people. And so we had this comment over here that really the main purpose is to improve local air quality and protect sensitive communities. Aaron, is there a meaningful approval component to talking about greenhouse gas reductions?
But the reason why we have put that in there, because the funding for this program comes from the GGRF funds. So we want to
Okay.
show that when you do the calculations, there are some greenhouse gas reductions that do occur with that. So just wanted to acknowledge that is all that is.
Okay, great. So you wouldn't object to us saying something like, you
A
know,
benefit.
while a major benefit.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with, just,
Okay.
it was just
Well, I
one of those
wasn't
situations
sure.
where it does happen. We just want to acknowledge it. That's it.
Great. So I'm just going to add some more about why we thought it was in here. And to improve local air quality and protect sensitive communities. Sweet. Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. I went too fast. So moving on from this paragraph, and feel free to edit whoever's in there. So we went over this. This is just sort of so I'm going to resolve these comments over here because we just answered that we don't need to further substantiate that a broader community cares about this, because CARB really only cares if this is an approved SERP from our CSC. So this was a comment that I actually agreed with. I think, and I think this kind of gets back to some of Doug's concern. If there's a way about a mechanism for, instead of informing, really community directed process. I know that that's never fun. since we're in one right now, I think we can all agree with that. But it runs the risk, to Doug's point earlier, that once we get this work plan approved and somebody gets a contract, that they may not remember that they really do have an obligation to continue to pivot and retool based on feedback from the community. So I would say mechanism for community engagement. And maybe here is where, we have these traditional outreach, and thank you. I really like the second paragraph about how the air district will help us track process. But there's an element in our SERP about rolling oversight. And so somebody check me if it muddies the waters to say, collaborate with CSC trees subcommittee members on the engagement strategy. I mean, I know we have a community engagement committee, but I'd like whoever gets this to know that they don't get to run with it just once they get it. Or am I getting into the details, Aaron, on the RFP?
If they want that in, that's fine. That'll also be really, highlighted in the RFP itself is like, well, not only the RFP, but the contract with the contractor will say, we'll have a list of everything they need to do and conduct on a quarterly, semi-annual, what they're going to do basis. And that would be one of them is like, you need to come back and report back to the committee what you're doing,
Yeah.
what's happened, what are the limitations too, what roadblocks have you hit, and just overall update on what's going on there.
Well, I didn't feel like there was sort of a clear outline of how there really is a check for approval and a check for authority built into this whole process.
No, I think it's good. I think it's good.
Great. Since we're not paying by the letter, I'd like to leave it in there
Yeah, I think it's great.
in case I get hit by a bus or somebody or I get what I deserve.
Matt?
Yes.
We have not had any mailers go out. I just really object. The outreach conducted should include the following. It has not. There hasn't been any.
Oh, yeah, no, none of this has ever happened.
Yeah, so I just want to, that gives the impression that, it's happened. So that's all.
I think these bullet points are they not strategies for once we develop the RFP, how we send out the RFP to potential people who would respond to it?
It's kind of the whole process. It's the RFP, it's what's going on, what we're doing with the money. It's all in one if you really look at it from a whole.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm just saying, I think this specific paragraph in the work plan is aiming at that, just ways to let people know that there's a request for proposals.
But also just the progress as well, not just the RFP, but the progress and what's happened and stuff like that as well.
Okay.
Cliff, do I got you covered here?
Yeah.
I was a little distracted by looking at some text. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, I think, I think that part there is all good because it's
right.
again, can be put in more detail later. The
Yeah,
more
well,
general now, the better.
Cool. So then this eligibility stuff is where, I was like, who's really going to do this? These seem pretty broad. This seems pretty standard. We don't have any special districts here. My dear friend from Oakland has a wonderful imagination about the political realities of San Joaquin County. But I guess that could include the port. Huh. That's a public agency. Never mind, that's covered. GID is a green improvements district. This is a strategy really coming up around the country to provide green infrastructure maintenance when cities, counties, and states can't. And so it's like a business improvement district that you'll see in certain towns where they'll fund a set aside.
Will you spell that out there?
Yeah. And I would say it's fanciful, except that it may have legs depending on some other things in the state. So here's my question, I guess, Aaron, is this is basically an opportunity to leave the door open to some third entity that doesn't exist. I guess special district would cover it. And
Yeah, you never know, right? You don't want to limit yourself here.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. This was my maintenance thing that like none of our governments have demonstrated the ability to do this for all sorts of things. Is CARB going to say, is CARB's incentives people going to say that this is required for the incentives program, that these are variable investments?
I'll just respond this way. Most of the contracts we have for, let's say, for replacing locomotive or doing school buses, they have reporting requirements and maintain maintenance requirements for 5 to 10 years, where the money that we give them will help pay for some of that is ongoing to make sure that, for example, if you just plant a tree and walk away and don't have any type of plan and they all die within 2 years, then what'd you get? That's our
Nothing.
fear.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Mary Elizabeth.
I thought I was on mute. Sorry.
That's
What
all
you'll
right.
get is nothing.
Yeah. Oh, nothing.
Yeah, I think we want to word this so we ensure the trees are maintained, but kind of not or leave the pressure off, or not make it so people don't want to apply for the project.
Yeah, well, let me run a scenario by you. If you get a CAL FIRE grant and the tree dies within the performance period of the grant, the city has to replace it at their own cost. And so I'm just wondering why CARB or the Air District would need to have that kind of a clawback instrument built in here. I mean, I get it on the trains and all that stuff, but that's also
Yeah.
paying an industry that's still generating revenue. Whereas when I plant these trees, I'm actually, absorbing an unfunded mandate to maintain them. And I've got enough governments leaning on me to do that. So
Yeah, I agree. I just think we need to make it, general, so it's not a big requirement, yet it satisfies.
So
the
what
need.
about Cliff, like language like, maintained in keeping with,
Because I think if as long
There's
as
money for
number
this.
G is
Yeah,
there,
I mean, the money, I mean, with Matt, the more the Matt, but I think that I think what Matt trying to say is that if we caught a fire and the trees do not go back where we put on where it did, are they gonna replant? Who would, because I know the city, when I had the tree in my front of my house, they told me it's my responsibility if my tree dies, or if I have to treat them, I have to go buy a liquid form and I have to treat the tree up, but they don't do nothing, but I have to do it to maintain it. So if the tree gets burned, get in the fire and the hot get in the fire, who replaced it? Do the people that live there, or the city replaced it and backed up, and that to replace that cost that was given by the subcommittee for that reason? Is that gonna be like a risk liability management?
Well, part of the RFP and part of the money can be used for this. That's why we kind of wrote it in there where, they have a proposal of $7 million, and out of that they have $10,000 they keep in reserve for these situations for the next 10 years. So, I mean, that's why it's there. It's like our biggest fear from the Air District is that we spend all this money and half the trees die within 2 years.
yeah, totally. Well, and so this, as we kind of said earlier, like if we do end up funding a demonstration project at the port or in one of these Caltrans setbacks, that if it magically materializes, the size of that project will be greatly reduced, and the benefits of that project will be greatly reduced by the maintenance obligations of this. Now, I actually don't think that's unreasonable, since we have to find a whole world of other funding to meet our problem at scale. So just so long that everybody understands that leaving in this contract period means we're not foresting from MLK to 8th Street alongside a single freeway. We are talking about 1,000 feet of vegetative barrier out of this $1 million measure. Like this 10-year maintenance obligation significantly shrinks the scope of the planting. Now, if it also helps us solve the cooperation problem and develop, a community stewardship program that has legs, of which there are oodles around the state of California that we can buy, borrow, and steal from and emulate, then it'll be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, the ideal thing is every person or every entity that submits an RFP will have a unique maintenance plan for the planting project they want to do. So at this point, I think we can just say basically that there has to be a maintenance plan to be eligible for the program. So, we maybe just take out the second sentence in D there, or you could almost remove it altogether, because also down at G, it says ensure that the trees must be purchased, planted, and maintained. The specifications provided in CAL FIRE's urban and community forestry grant guidelines.
Yeah, I agree, Cliff. I think this is a devil detail that's more RFP appropriate than work plan. Aaron,
Yeah.
is that going to fly in your office? That argument?
Yeah, I think it will. I just, like I said, I just go back, we got to have some safeguards in the contract with the contractor that they don't plant them and then 2 years later they'll die and we got nothing out of it. That's my biggest fear.
Totally. Well, I mean, and that concern is, I'll dare say I'm more scared of that than you are.
Yeah.
It'll be good reason to run me out of town. But I would just like to say that to maybe leave that's part of a cost benefit analysis that we're going to have to look at for the size of the planting, and putting 10 years in a work plan that CARB approves removes our ability to right size the RFP.
Yeah, maybe if we could just maybe get away with putting that as 3 years for now. I mean, that seems like a reasonable, the entire contract period is the time period it mentions, which for an organization to do this project realistically wouldn't be 10 years anyway. It'd be more in the space of 2 to 3
And
years.
who knows what the contract period will be, right? Like we may very well be proposing a narrow contract at our port that does have a maintenance budget that they're interested in putting in a community stewardship partner's hands. So I don't know. I just feel like putting 10 years at the work plan level means there's no going back once it's approved in Sacramento.
Okay.
It seemed too specific. So
yeah, maybe we could just leave the time frame off then for now, but say it has to be maintenance still.
The contract period will be determined in the RFP. Mary, do you still have your hand up, or is this a new comment?
No, I meant to have my hand down, but I feel very strongly about this maintenance issue. And I know you all may be looking at it from a practicality as a contractor, but as just a person that lives there, I've seen contractors come in and contractors go. And I'm not saying that's the case in this instance, but I think that it's very important that we ensure that there's a lifetime, and it takes longer than 3 years to establish some trees.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean that.
And this is Margot. I just have to agree with Mary Elizabeth. And we do include maintenance and rehab projects for funding. So it ought to be built into the plan of their project. And those reimbursements shouldn't come about until they're needed, right? I mean, the reimbursements come when the work is actually done, correct? Well, that doesn't make much sense, because the reimbursements aren't going to happen for 10 years. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's not a scenario that will play out like that. But I hear you. I
That's-
will say,
you
if we
know-
put in 10 years of maintenance on these trees, we're expecting more of a community stewardship practice than we currently hold our local governments accountable for. And it may very well stifle this effort. And so, you know, Mary and Margot, to your question, I mean, I think this is an opportunity for us to have some flexible funding to build that community stewardship partnership that our city so desperately needs.
Well, and this could keep us moving forward as a committee above and beyond AB 617.
Right, forming an urban forestry advisory committee within the city that works closely and supports public works, particularly when budgets come along.
Well, and finding the grant monies that go along with all this.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure I'm capturing here in this participant eligibility criteria. I think some of what the project eligibility criteria coming up next. Cliff, you had a comment in here about planting material being sourced. I don't see any
Yeah.
issue with that.
Yeah, that was just one, thing. It just seemed like something extra that really wouldn't be necessary to be in the work plan. As long
Okay.
as, as long as just instead generalize it to, instead of county to state, I think that's reasonable.
Okay. Well, I
Well,
mean,
most of the time the ag commissioners are actually countywide though. Each county is only ag commissioner.
okay. Well, what about this, Aaron? I mean, nobody's planting trees that aren't in line with CAL FIRE's urban and community forestry program. I mean, why wouldn't we make that magnetic north on a plan like this? I don't know.
think that also may include the county.
Hold on, excuse me, Matt. Can you answer a question for me? I don't understand. What does CAL FIRE mean? Is it the county or at state level? I don't understand.
CAL FIRE is the California State Department of Forestry and Fire. They're technically a forestry organization, but because we're California, they're the guys with helicopters that put out fires. And so they dropped the word forestry from their common name, but they are responsible for forestry in California. And they actually have a really thorough, if somewhat rigid, urban and community forestry program that has established specs and basic,
Do they have county and local forestry as well instead of the state? Are there more stringent than at the state level than going the level of local and county level?
I am unaware of. Yeah, I think I only know about the state leadership on forestry.
Okay.
But I think yeah.
I mean, what I'm trying to say is that when you say CAL Forestry Fire, are you allowing to having a contract with the subcommittee to just in case?
Yeah, that's not interacting here. This is really just about making sure that whoever ends up planting these trees isn't doing something dumb that doesn't belong here.
Right, okay.
Right, so we're not planting, thirsty trees in California or in Stockton. I just think there's a more specific forestry expertise at CAL FIRE than the agricultural commissioner's office, but I've never really run with those guys out here. So
we've just never contacted them before bringing in trees to plant. I mean, it's not a big deal though. I don't think it'll be
Doug, if we buy trees, we're
can
gonna
leave
buy
it in
them from a nursery that knows more about trees than anybody regulating this stuff. So
and nurseries in the state are all licensed, to sell planting stock to ensure that they're following proper protocols to not spread disease, tree pathogens and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's what that's mostly about.
yeah. So I don't know. My concerns are covered.
That's a bigger concern with Matt, what Matt's trying to say, and my concern is that the protocol. We don't hoop over something that is not been making a decision by somebody else that didn't go by the subcommittee. That's the concern I'm concerned about. As far as that, a 10-year contract, mean, guarantee, we don't know if we're gonna live that long to see if it's gonna be able to be available or not.
I am gonna live that long, Doug, all right? I am gonna live.
Hopefully, but I'm not saying,
Okay.
but I'm just saying that hopefully that what they say, I know contractors think that want to get paid right up in front. But yet, when things have got guaranteed, at the end of the 7-year cycle, and then go up to 8 years, and the tree is damaged. Okay, where's the money they're gonna? When are they gonna ditch the tree out of the hole?
Yeah, I hear
You know what I
that.
mean? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I'm gonna keep us moving along. You know, I mean, we've got the CAL FIRE criteria in here. I don't know if anybody's ever gonna call it. Does anybody even know our agricultural commissioner? I bet they do not have notes on how we plant trees there. So that's all I was just flagging there.
I think we should get, like, maybe we have the air quality monitor, contact them, and have them talk to us, and see we can ask them instead of giving an assumption.
I think I hear you, Doug. Let's leave it in there and let's move on. So in the project eligibility criteria, a lot of stuff about which trees to plant. None of this is controversial. I do think something missing from the project eligibility criteria are some of the prioritization of project areas that Ned flagged about, most impacted communities. We have really clear census tracts in the 100th, 99th, 98th percentile. Aaron, is this going down a rabbit hole on?
I think that's a rabbit hole. I think that's for the RFP itself.
Great.
Their project plan should include these areas in the RFP.
Great, yeah. And then design and engineering requirements. Some of this does not look complete here. I mean, I'll just tell you that there's the
I don't know if we typed that in there. I don't know where that, we didn't do that, I don't think.
the site selection eligibility process. This isn't yours?
No.
Yeah, that looks added, but
Yeah, that looks added.
that's probably stuff that would be on the RFP,
Okay,
unless anyone who added those notes has any other comments on it.
yeah, well, I mean, I think there's something in here about, so I'm gonna actually withhold these for the RFP. And I'll just put them in comments, but I think, I don't know. I mean, I both want to signal that we're prioritizing who needs trees soonest. I think this gets back to our demonstration project.
And I think that can be done like we kind of do with Fresno through an exercise with the committee where they kind of plot where they think, and we put those plots actually into the RFP, say your plan must include these areas, and where feasible, your plant here, if you can get access to do it type of thing. I know there's more to it than that, but it's more from the community telling the community shows where they want them. The RFP lists those locations, and then basically it says you will do your best to put them in these locations, because it's not all guaranteed, right? Like some people won't want it there, so
Yeah.
That's the nuance of it. We can get into a little later, basically.
Okay. Well, I just don't know if, yeah, well, I guess we'll just save that for the RFP. I do think there is some monitoring finally going on. I don't know that it's comprehensive enough at this moment to include it in the work plan either. So I'm going to move all of these comments over into a recommendation for a future RFP.
Yeah, I think the monitoring is more probably for us with our monitoring folks, not for probably the trees itself, probably.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Matt, can you hold on for a minute? Stephanie?
Yes.
I need to get going. I might have to leave at 5, so I'm gonna go right now. So I'm gonna leave early, so Mark's leaving us also at 5 at 12, okay? So have a great meeting. I'll come by when the next meeting come, all right? Thank you so much for everyone. Take care.
Thank you,
Hey,
Doug.
Doug.
Thanks,
Thank
Doug.
you. One thing that I had included here in that participant eligibility was something about irrigation requirement verification. I don't know.
Yeah, make sure it's got water for the first couple of years. I think that's also RFP details. Don't plant a tree
Yeah.
where it's gonna die and you're not ready to take care of it.
Yeah, that would be something required in like the reporting process for people doing the project, that verifying the irrigation is hooked up twice a year or so.
Yep, I didn't see any other issues with the rest of this.
I guess the biggest thing too, I mean, we have it in here, up to 25% can be for admin. That's
Mhm.
up to amount gives us leeway, but the committee decides is it 5%, 10%, 7.5%. It's just there. I know maintenance, the admin was mentioned already, but it's available, and just we can scale it up and down in the RFP, how much you want to give for admin, because it does cost money to do this, right? For their
Yeah,
admin.
I don't object to that, knowing what it costs to maintain the equipment to actually start all of this out.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
depending on who we work with, we'd certainly have a different rate, but
Yep.
it doesn't freak me out. And if we get the right science firm working on this, they will charge us an appropriate administrative. fee.
Okay. Just
So,
want to point that out. Okay.
yeah. I don't like the idea of giving $250,000 to nothing.
I agree 100%. So it worries me too, but it gives us more room to scale it back if we have to.
Yeah, Aaron, I don't worry about you guys giving it away. That's for sure. I just can't believe we're squeezed this much out of you. So project selection and reporting.
Well, I mean, trees are new to us. We don't do trees. I'm
Yeah.
learning myself. This is not what we do. So I'm learning with everybody here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're fortunately, we're all learning at the same time, but we're actually learning something meaningful. Oh,
Yep.
I'm seeing chats here. Okay, these are just people saying thank you. Oh, Nate, yes. Yeah, thanks, Regina, for rooting for me to stay alive. Thank you. Okay, looks like I haven't missed anything too material in here, and I see we're over the hour. But I think most of this makes sense. Tree planting tool 9, yep, makes sense. Does anybody else have any final sort of detailed comments on the work plan? And so that they want to discuss right now? Great. So I think back to the original high level comments, and sorry if I'm making everybody sick by scrolling so much. It's just that our work plan, I still want to make sure, Aaron, that there's space in here for these RFPs. Like maybe there is a small, pollution dispersal study that says this stretch of I-5 is where the most PM blows across the road. And that maybe that's a $50,000 study for, there are modeling firms that do this work.
Well, I think that if we start paying for a study, that's a little different than paying for trees themselves. And I would be leery of starting to go that way with this money when it wasn't written that way in the SERP to do studies rather than actually planting the trees themselves.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Well,
Well,
wouldn't you agree though that an initial study to be strategic in our location could require some additional information?
I agree, but I will say this, to do something like that, to do a plan, to do the study, the time it would take to do it, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm just saying out loud here, the time it takes to do that, pull that thing off and then start the tree project after that. How much time are we talking there to do this?
I'm just
Yeah.
also thinking that's another subcommittee that's doing the air monitoring.
Yeah.
So that kind of, it complements what we're doing at the same time, but it would be happening simultaneously, but hopefully those air monitors can guide.
Yeah, well, I would
future
just
tree
say, Cliff,
plantings.
we don't have a camp that looks at dispersion.
Mhm.
We didn't design a camp that looked at dispersion. We tried that. We still have an unapproved draft community air monitoring plan from November 2020. And so that's why
Okay.
we were really pushing for a distributed remote sensor network that could show you how PM fluctuates across the Stockton landscape. But we ended up not getting that. So I actually don't think the camp will tell us what you're asking. I think my project with the Department of Justice will. And I think it'll tell you that by the end of this year. But so maybe it doesn't need to be built into this work plan, but I do think it highlights how important those conversations were in fall and winter of 2020, and what a shame it was that they were aborted in the way that they were.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So
maybe that's a fight we win somewhere else, Cliff. And Ned and Mary, I see you nodding to this. Like, I would like to have a study that says, this is why we're doing this here, so that when the community comes to me and says, why are you planting in your neighborhood, not my neighborhood? I could say, we have this. You know, we have this study. So I want to respect your time, but I feel like we're kind of hitting on something that really matters here.
Yeah,
Well, I
like
think
you
it's
said-
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
Just very quickly, just to reiterate, I think, we have certain areas where we suspect there's a very high level of pollution, especially around the schools where there are children. And to coordinate with the air monitoring is where we should preferentially put these resources. That's all. It's going to be hard to have a real exact study. But if you do things right, as I say, if you have monitors outside the fence, inside the buildings, you're going to see what the effect is of vegetative barriers or urban greening. That's going to deliver a lot of very important information. And if the RFP you ask for the monitoring information, it will be enlightening. I don't know that this idea of following the dispersion and distribution, the PM 2.5, that's pretty exotic stuff. But gee, it's really clear around Washington School, the Port, and these other schools, St. George's. Boy, I just hope we can do a lot in those areas.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we've got 7 sensors inside classrooms and outside classrooms at St. George's with OEHA that are being looked at with sharp people. So maybe there's, maybe there is a baseline monitoring and a monitoring for the duration. And this is not monitoring for monitoring's sake.
Well, so around St. George, you try to allocate, if you can, the vegetative barriers, urban greening, see if it has an effect.
That's something we can consider when we develop what criteria we're
There's something
using
there.
to score applications. That, yeah, people can do, tree plantings or vegetative barriers in these areas with air monitors. That is, something that boosts their eligibility.
Aaron, I think we're talking about a really modest complementary air monitoring project with the vegetative barrier strategy. Who's going to freak out at that?
I will just say this, is that's probably a little on my scope on this project here, is I think that would be a broader discussion. Because all of a sudden you're talking about taking funds that were meant for trees and doing a study with those funds. So it's a little different, and it's a different animal, I believe. And so it might be a different pathway is all I'm going to say to that. And I don't know the full behind that, but I think it's beyond this committee at this point in time to talk about, because literally it's talking about diverting funds for something else. And I want to make sure we're very clear that that's what the intent is.
Go ahead,
I
Neil.
strongly disagree with that. Look, I've been a strong advocate for this. It's been recognized in the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. They have really grafted in a lot about vegetative barriers and urban greening as a solution, or at least to address some of the problems of pollution here. It is fundamental. And what is also fundamental, there's a tremendous lack of cogent study as to what works and what does not work. It's meaningless to go out and just do vegetative barriers or urban greening and not be able to measure what the effect is. You have to link them with the air monitoring. I strongly disagree with that statement.
Yep, I think we can actually supply a lot of the expensive stuff in all of this, Aaron. But I do think it's important for the work plan to acknowledge that this vegetative barrier strategy is considerate of monitoring and modeling of pollution dispersion in and around the vegetative barrier project. And I think I'm going to recommend that is part of the project identification. in this first narrative element on the first page. So I'm gonna send you back with some text. And I think our challenge is at the CSC meeting is voting on a work plan that includes a baseline and duration of project that considers baseline air monitoring that maybe doesn't, the monitoring may not need to be funded out of this. But it's no secret. There's a $1.2 million automobile related emissions study being led by UC Merced's Health Science Research Institute that will be putting up 70 remote sensors in South Stockton. And they will be using that to correlate PM data to hospitalizations and respiratory irritants. And we will be using that data in another project to actually model how that air moves across the city's landscape. I think those are two already funded, publicly available data sets that should be considered by this project. And for negligible sums, we're talking $40,000, $50,000. The analysis, we might be able to talk this Health Science Research Institute into looking at a quarter-mile stretch of road in greater detail. So, if the work plan just includes that this vegetative barrier strategy will consider existing state-funded air monitoring projects in the study area, including the AB 617 monitoring, as well as the Justice Department monitoring and additional CARB monitoring that are happening in the region. I mean, we're actually really just pointing back to other elements of the AB 617 project, in truth. So let's see, I'm gonna take a stab at that sentence.
Okay.
In the vegetative barrier paragraph. And maybe Aaron, you could circulate back feedback on this sentence in the intervening weeks between now and the next community steering committee meeting. And I will submit that text to everyone who signed in on tonight's sign-in sheet.
Okay, and then will you email that when you're done, Matt, to myself? And
Yeah,
then-
yep. I'll copy you and everyone on this call
Great.
with that added language that frames this project.
And we will take the comments today, and myself, David Lopez is one of my supervisors overseas, the Fresno one right now. He's here listening. We will take the comments today, kind of clean it up a little bit, make it presentable document at that point in time where it's basically kind of ready to go to ARB at that point in time if we all agree. And then we're ready to rock and roll because we're kind of like, let's go. So we can start the RFP process with the committee, to be honest with you. That's where the real nuts and bolts of this.
Yeah, we want to upvote it March.
Yeah, so we're ready to rock and roll.
Couldn't agree more. Anybody that wants to work on the wordsmithing, I'm at your service. I will submit a 2 or 3 clause sentence into this document right now that you all have access to. Feel free to edit, suggest, or comment as needed. Stephanie, you got your hand up.
I just want to clarify what I just heard. Is the idea from the subcommittee to bring back a vote at the CSC, the March CSC meeting? If so, I just want to make sure that if we're doing any feedback or votes or anything, that we're just agendizing correctly so that the CSC kind of knows what's going on in March.
I believe this subcommittee is recommending approval of this work plan as soon as it includes this clause about consideration of relevant air monitoring data in the vegetative barrier strategy.
Sounds
Does that basically consider where you plant them based upon the studies? Is that what we want to say?
I think it's more a matter of when we identify the vegetative barrier demonstration project that we have before, during, and after monitoring data that demonstrates how well it works, or if it works at all, or what's missing at scale.
Okay.
It'll depend on where that project is chosen. There's certainly a lot of refinement in the RFP process that's going to make it matter or not matter.
Then I know, going to that, then I do know that as I'm trying to think more, if it's talking about the vegetative barriers, not just vegetative barriers, I know companies that do that, correct?
Yep.
I'm thinking of the one that I know of is Sonoma Technology, right? So That's
That'd
what
be
pops in my
great.
head. I'm sure there's other ones that's just pops in my head right now.
Yep,
Where that's what they do, right? So that could be kind of, at this point in time, a sub grantee of the contractor that does that pre and after, and they give the results in the vegetative barrier RFP. That would be part, that could be part of it as well, with part of that's carved out. So for urban greening, I don't see it as much, but the barriers I do.
great. Yeah, for sure. Urban greening, yeah.
Okay. No, I just want to make, maybe I didn't hear you correctly when we first got going here. So, okay, I get where you're going. I think it could be a sub contractor to the contractor that kind of does that study with one of these agencies who does that essentially. So I think that's not out of the realm.
Okay, great. Yeah, and considering what you just said, I think there's a clause signaling the importance of monitoring data and the narrative front piece of this work plan. And then there's also a project eligibility bullet about the utilization of baseline and performance period monitoring data. Or at least just that it's captured over the course of this project. That's the kind of thing that lets us go back and receive another, and every other year award from CARB or Natural Resources Agency for future funding to expand these programs. So this helps us build in some sort of seed of credibility, I would imagine.
So I think we just want to add some language in the work plan that encourages the monitoring and research side of things, but make sure it also doesn't require it and exclude people who aren't going to do that.
That's right. That's right. I think, yeah, right. So, you might
Basically.
be great at planting trees, but you're gonna need to consider this data in our committee in this project.
Great.
So I'm gonna put in a bullet here in the project eligibility. Maybe here, I'll do it in E. To substantiate or dismiss. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Actually, what I have is just really, I guess, a little bit more looking toward the vote and presenting this to the full CSC. I'm not sure how you're planning to queue that, but I just had a couple thoughts that I thought might be important. And one is really to lay out the difference for the CSC, that what they're looking at is not not the RFP, it's not the nitty gritty, it's not the document you're going to be using to actually, it's not that level of detail, but it's really more just this project plan to submit to CARB to get the approval for the funding. So whoever's going to kind of tee that up, I would just make sure that differentiation is very clear for the full CSC to avoid any confusion. And I know it's just kind of like a word thing, but even calling this kind of like a work plan indicates that this is actually part of the work that's getting done. And so, kind of what we refer these to in CARB and the district is a project plan, which is really more, kind of the project planning piece versus actually getting the work done. And so just a couple thoughts on ways to maybe use the words to where it's not confusing to the full CSC when you actually go before them with this document for their approval.
Well, I would think we would be sending the document ahead of time, perhaps even with the agenda, so that they can review it. And so maybe that, what you're saying, Scott, the defining what they're looking at might need to be done at that point in time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the earlier you can kind of start communicating that, and then also to verbally, because not everybody kind of like goes to the level of detail in reading the stuff. But I think, yeah, every step along the way, I think is going to be important for them to understand that this isn't really the actual work, getting done. It's more a project, high-level project plan.
So is that something that we can clarify in dialogue in March, or is that something where we're talking about renaming this from a project that is identified or a?
I think even the
makes it-
wording on the top, like emissions reduction, it's like so close. I know we've used a lot of terms, program plan, you just like pop project plan into that, because I think that's kind of the terminology that CARB uses. Is that kind of what you're getting
Yeah,
at?
yeah,
Scott?
I agree. So it can be, they're interchangeable all the time, but that's fine. In emission reduction project plan would be just fine.
So there's no confusion between program plan, work plan. This is kind of the project plan we're aiming to get approved by CARB.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of get interchanged all the time.
Well, and it's also, I mean, as Mary Elizabeth astutely pointed out, this is an exposure reduction strategy. But I don't know. I mean, Scott, emissions and exposure reduction was in the initial legislation, but we ended up with SERPs, not SERPs. There should be 2 E's. I'm still pissed about that.
Yeah, agreed. Although, we're not enforcing that in execution. So that's the good news, is that we are obviously see the benefit of both. But I guess maybe to take it even one step further, to Stephanie's point, I mean, really what this is it's a community identified project plan. This is what it is. It's a plan that we don't have anything to define by it now. And so, what this really is it's a community identified project plan that you're needing CARB's approval to spend the money this way, basically. And so as much as you can, I guess, keep all of those reads kind of woven in the same direction, I think it would help to keep things clear.
That's SERPy with 2 P's. Community identified. Yeah. Well, it's a start. So I put in the, thank you, Scott. I think how we present this to everybody else will matter. And I think, yeah, there are cultural things about, you guys are emission reduction agencies, and this is not that. This is an innovative strategy to protect people. And hopefully we're all learning to value those equally. So I wanted to add a narrative piece about the utilization of data up here, but it's now 5:24. So I'm gonna work on that. Everybody has a copy of this doc that wants it. Everybody has my email that wants to inform it. Just to wrap up the monitoring language that I put in. It was in the, where did it go? It was in the eligibility. Program eligibility will consider baseline air monitoring data available through AB 617 and other air monitoring and other state funded. And if you guys want to tell me about any other air district funded projects, monitoring projects, like for example, the OEHA project at St. George is partially funded out of AB 617 dollars. That's our data. We should use it. It should matter. To Ned's point, if we were to surround that school, we have baseline indoor and outdoor air monitoring data at that school site going back to December 4th. That's something. So design and characterization of the benefits of the vegetative barrier project. So it's specific to vegetative barriers. I'll bold it and italicize it so that we know, so that we're clear that we're not saying this for everything. Cool. For the good of the order, anybody else have anything that's in their bonnet?
So Matt, I just want to say the agenda for March comes out next, a week from tomorrow or Thursday, one of those days. So just so you know. And so I think we need to have this ready to go out with the agenda, as well as an intro as to what people are looking at. But then I'm gonna guess you'll present at the CSC meeting?
I think I'm gonna have to be at this one, huh?
Yeah.
The damn Cultural Heritage Commission has waited 100 years to save these buildings. It can wait one more month, I suppose.
Oh, you never know.
Oh, geez. We have problems there, Margot. Sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, and just kind of getting to Margot's point, I wanted to check in. Aaron, David, does it sound feasible, kind of given if Matt could get these comments back, that we could get kind of a turnaround version like out to the subcommittee next week with the agenda?
I don't see that being a problem. I think most was already done here. It's just some formatting, some things here and there. I mean, that's done most of the work. I mean, for us to get this thing set up, ready to rock and roll should not be a big to do. David, do you have any comments on that?
No, I agree with Aaron. I've been, we'll, after the meeting tomorrow, we'll get back into it. Me and my team, and we'll start working on it, but very little. I mean, I think like Matt's already putting stuff in there. That's great. That's very helpful. And then we should be able to have it over to you by next week. Sure.
Yeah, we'll just do some formatting things, a couple things here and there. I think we'll be good to go.
Awesome, sounds good. So we can plan to get this out next week with the agenda, and then have a little blurb in the email to kind of describe what's going on. We'll also plan to agendize that, this tree subcommittee is seeking, recommends this project plan and is seeking approval from the entire CSC. I don't necessarily see this being something that we need to take a formal vote on. I think if it works out for you all, we can plan to do like a general consensus and see if there's any objections, unless anyone is like fighting to like work through every single person kind of stamping their yes on it. I think consensus could totally work for this, just kind of the full CSC approval.
Are we still struggling to conduct succinct votes? I thought we were able to vote pretty quickly these days.
I do think we can. I think our like kind of shortest time for like doing our voting method is about like 30 minutes. So, I mean, if that's something we want to devote meeting to versus kind of maybe seeking consensus and seeing if anyone has any like major objections based on what the subcommittee is presenting and what they see in the version we send out.
I tell you, I would like to establish a ritual where the CSC appreciates the recommendation of the subcommittee. And so to sort of do the wedding ritual of speak now or forever hold your peace. So I'm with that, Stephanie. I worry about somebody feeling like they weren't given an opportunity to fully raise their objections. So I think it just depends on how that consensus is described.
Totally. And I think we can kind of read the room. I think if we're feeling that there's like a lot of pull, like push and pull in the group, we can do like a formal vote and, see how that goes. I do think, that just tends to be something generally we can get consensus. It's a faster way and more effective way to run the meetings, but we can totally like see how the group is taking kind of the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we aren't stepping on toes, and because we know how sensitive people get. So how would the vote happen? Tell me that, would it be a roll call vote? How would you do that, Stephanie?
So what we've kind of moved to is we used to do roll call, but that took like a very, very long time. So typically what we've been doing is breaking out into breakout rooms, and we'll have a Google Doc with the whole roster, like our voting roster up. And then we'll call through individual folks in the breakout rooms. It just happens to be like smaller groups. I think the last time we did this in one of our other communities, it was about like 30-35 minutes. In this like kind of, we call it the Zong method because Zong came up with it. So that's typically how we've been conducting our votes. I think if we did a roll call in our main room, I would imagine would take a little bit longer than that.
Well, because how many members do we have? I thought we have like 35 members. So if you have a minute per person, that's kind of that's a long time.
Maybe this was in one of our bigger groups too, though. It could have been in one of our bigger CSCs.
Yeah, I'd say Harder knows how to hold the vote. It was the other guys that couldn't remember our names after 12 months.
Wow.
So Margot, just to clarify, are you requesting a vote or are you requesting not a vote?
Well, I'm not doing either. I'm being I just think I want to be really aware of how sensitive this committee can get. And just, if there's maybe we'll check. Well, we have our meeting on Thursday, Stephanie. Let's check with Harder and see how they envision this could happen, because we are gonna have to have votes in the future. And 30 minutes out of our time is huge. That's a huge chunk. So, you know, there ought to be a way of that we, you know, press a button. But I don't know what it is or something, you know, just, I'm not saying one way or the other, Scott. I apologize about that, but, I really don't want to override anybody. And I think earlier in the meeting is better than later, because we know people always have to drop off. So maybe, you know, after intros or something, I don't know. Matt, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would think we'd be able to go through and do a quick roll call vote. I don't know.
If this is like the will of the subcommittee, we can definitely make time for it. And I do think this meeting, we do have a little bit of extra time because we don't have any like giant agenda item, you know, taking up the bulk of the agenda.
I think if we ask everybody to unmute themselves and be quiet and be really, really quiet, and they just read down the list, then people aren't hunting for buttons while their name is called, you know, it's just, you know, maybe, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few weeks now. I feel like maybe, Margot, we can plan to talk. Do you feel good about maybe talking to the facilitators and seeing what ideas they might have? And we can maybe touch base with the co-leads of the group and kind of see how we want to move forward with that.
Right.
Does that feel good?
Right.
Matt, any last thoughts about that?
No last thoughts about that. Be happy to talk to them and just, you know, I do want, I guess, is this the first subcommittee recommendation to the broader CSC?
I think so.
I believe so, yeah.
So yeah, it would be nice to make a habit of supporting all the work that's going on in these subcommittees and not relitigating everything in the CSC. So
oh, well, how do you do that? I mean, people have to have their say. Are we talking about limiting their timeline?
yeah, well, I mean, I think there is an oh shit button where if it's eating up too much of the agenda that we need to get I think Margot, I think we can easily carry a vote. So Stephanie, wouldn't it just be quicker to plan to have a vote and to say, please review the material before the meeting, and your subcommittee recommends this work plan, and we want to get it voted on so we can move on to new business.
Project plan. And I think this is maybe a good issue to trial the vote on, because it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you know, it really is. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe, sorry, I even brought it up, but
No, Stephanie, it might be worth it for us to go through this in this first meeting. There's going to be more interesting subcommittee recommendations, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. We can definitely, I think we probably should work out timing with the facilitators, but if it's the interest to do a vote, then we'll agendize it as such to actually like write out vote on the, we just want to notate it differently. That way people know that we're taking like formal action on something.
Yeah, please write out vote
Yeah.
on the agenda. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, Matt, we look forward to see that back from you. We'll turn burn pretty fast.
Yeah,
Get it out for the
pretty
agenda
much
there.
done. I'm
Okay.
converting the controversial stuff to red, so it's easy for you to flag for other people.
Now, here's a question for you guys, I guess. Do you want this just in a final polished format with nothing on there, just it's ready to go? Or do you want stuff on there that the committee have made comments on as the track changes? How would you like that?
Let's just give them something clean that's ready to go.
All right, we'll give a perfectly copied, ready to go to ARB.
I'll throw my fits before the meeting.
Okay. All right, so during the meeting, you're like, here's the unified front, here's our plan.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's how we get this done.
Terrific. That sounds great to me. We will have no problem doing that for you.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the CSC. I mean, I think, you know, I think if there are factions, they've been on this subcommittee and they've had a chance to inform this.
Okay.
You know,
All right, I like it.
Ned's usually the only guy I worry about pulling out details. And he seemed to support some of the things that we talked about. So,
Okay, no, I'm on board, and like I said, I think David's crew can turn around this really fast. I don't worry about that too much.
Yep, sounds good. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Okay.
cool, thanks. Yeah, I'll shoot you a Word version of this and let you know if any, I don't think I'm even gonna look for any future changes.
Okay,
Give it a head.
perfect. Everybody have a good night. Appreciate it, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks for sticking it out.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
all. Bye-bye.